There was one lone police car and an officer trying to evacuate the area due to the broken gas lines. "Evacuate the area immediately. Do not light matches or cigarettes," we heard over the police car's loudspeaker. He announced that the ferries were leaving from Pier 41, which is 20 piers northwest of the ferry building. So we began the long, eerie hike down the waterfront to Pier 41. Our sustenance consisted of brandy from a flask we had taken to the game, some peanuts, a thermos of coffee, and a flask of whiskey. It gets cold at the ballpark at night, although it was unseasonably warm this night. Some people call it earthquake weather. Our hike was marked by darkness and groups of people gathered around radios. One lucky group of about 25 was gathered around a portable TV on an 18-wheeler. The driver had rigged it up in one of the truck's storage compartments so that it could be watched from the sidewalk. There were more long lines at phones and the periodic smell of leaking gas which kept us smokers at bay. There were also great cavernous darkened warehouses, some of which were open. You could see dark shapes inside and occasionally a dim flashlight beam moving around the inside. We found PG&E trucks and crews working on gas lines, mega overtime for those brave workers. The sky over the bay glowed a faint orange to the west. The color and a long, thin cloud we speculated were the result of the Marina District fires. There were also reports of fires in Berkeley and Emeryville across the bay. When we got to Fisherman's Wharf, Pier 41, it was so dark and there were so few people we thought we'd made this hike in vain. However, there really were ferry boats loading people for the East Bay and Marin County, the other end of the Golden Gate Bridge, which had reopened by this time. There were only about 75 people on our boat. We wondered where everyone was, since there must be 150,000 people from the East Bay and the city with no way home. It turned out that we were on the first boat leaving for Oakland. Incidentally, there is no regular ferry service between San Francisco and the East Bay. This Quake Bay helped establish permanent service. Right, we were. It was amazing and wonderfully civic-minded that these boats were instantly available to rescue us. We departed and headed toward the ferry building. To my surprise, the captain announced that we were going to pick up more people. Apparently they had worked out a way to let people stay there in spite of the gas. It may be my imagination, but the faint smell of gas was still present. There was a huge throng waiting to board and many boats picking people up. While we waited for dock space, the scene was so surreal. We'll never forget it. San Francisco was almost totally dark, save for dim emergency lights, car lights, and the flashing blue, white, red, and orange lights of emergency vehicles. Overhead was the Bay Bridge way up in the sky. It was completely dark. In normal times, the bridge is brilliantly lit with headlights, taillights, street lights, and lights all over the structure. There were occasional emergency vehicles with their flashing lights moving back and forth on the lower deck. And there was a helicopter overhead shining a bright spotlight on the bridge structure, trolling back and forth and looking for what? People, damage, who knows? In the background was a huge blood orange 3/4 moon in the sky, presumably orange from the smoke of the fires caused by the quake. Across the water, the East Bay appeared so normal, it seemed brightly lit to us, although we found out later there were many areas without electricity. The ride across the bay was so peaceful, beautiful, and serene. What an evening of contrasts. We shared experiences with fellow travelers along with our peanuts, whiskey, and brandy. There was no food or drink on the boat. We talked to a woman who had been trapped on the bridge who, with thousands of others, had walked off the bridge. She told us about the many vehicles abandoned on the bridge by motorists who fled in frustration or panic after the quake. Throughout the voyage, more and more details kept coming out over the radio about the Cypress Freeway collapse, the Marina District fires, and sketchy news about the disasters in Santa Cruz and Watsonville. This has been all over the national news, so you are all too familiar with it. We had no idea what we were going home to. When we arrived at Jack London Square in Oakland, I organized 3 cheers for the ferryboat company and the crew. They too joined the ranks of the cops and the bus drivers as our personal heroes. Upon disembarking, we saw sorry remnants of what began as a World Series party for Oakland fans. There were very few people, all restaurants were closed, some darkened. There was a huge 18-foot square Diamond Vision TV screen on which the game was to be broadcast to the assembled multitudes, darkened now. There were people and buses waiting to pick ferry passengers up, and there was the Salvation Army passing out coffee and sandwiches. We began walking up Broadway past more lines at public phones. Luckily, we found a phone with no line at the police station and called Mark's wife Jenny to come and pick us up. Downtown Oakland revealed various scenes of damage. Most buildings were lit. A relatively new AT&T building had many windows out and water cascading down through the exterior light fixtures onto the street. Oddly enough, there was another memorable scene which somehow didn't make it into this, and to this day I don't know why we didn't put it in there, but there was the APL headquarters building was then under construction. It's a 26-story building or so, and it hadn't been finished, and there was this huge girder that came loose at the top and fell down and speared itself into the ground in the plaza in front of the building. It was quite a dramatic sight. There was a checkerboard of blocks with lights and others without lights. The major downtown department store was extensively damaged, and several blocks around the local 535 office were damaged. And were damaged. Several blocks around the local 535 office were without power. We heard there was looting close by, but we didn't see anything. In fact, there was no one on the street at all. David's, that's me, car was parked at the local 535 office behind an electric gate, and the power was off. So we got Barbara's car from the BART station and arrived home at about 11:30 p.m., 6 hours after the game was to start. That previously eagerly awaited event sure had disappeared from our minds.